Hi everyone. Today we're going to look at a 2200 square meter co-working floor within a building. However, I wanted to do this one a bit differently because the last, I'd say, three feasibilities I've done for co-working opportunities in Australia, I've looked at them completely differently on behalf of a landlord, partner and customer, right? So instead of taking that full floor for a co-working opportunity, which would sit really nicely at 2200 square meters from an economies of scale perspective, I've been looking at how we can split that up to de-risk it slightly for the owner because we're looking at a partnership style agreement, a management agreement with them, but also because they don't have any spec suites or smaller tenancies within their building. They've just got these big floors that are taken up by anchor tenants, right? So we're going to look at this opportunity from my lens right now because I'd love it to see if, that's something that you can pick up for your own opportunity, even if you're not doing this on behalf of a landlord, but your own co-working tenancy. So let's take a look. We're looking at a co-working floor in the middle of this building. And that's important because in this hypothetical opportunity, let's call it there's two anchor tenants within the asset. And let's say one is a legal anchor and the other is a media anchor. Immediately when I was speaking to this owner, there was an opportunity to put specific amenities to really help keep those anchor tenants in place within that building because their renewals were coming up in the next 2-3 years. So the owner was like, oh shit, we've got this co-working floor opportunity around the middle of the building. Hey, is there anything that you can put within that tenancy, within your operation to help me keep the legal and the media anchor tenants in there? And we'll compensate you for it. And by that, the arrangement was potentially some of the operating costs of the co-working space can be put into outgoings for the building because we're actually putting stuff in for those two particular anchor tenants. And those anchors wouldn't really dispute the outgoings going slightly up if it's to be servicing particular amenities. So that's food for thought for you immediately because I can't speak to the exact product mixes that we were putting in, but just think of things that a legal institution or a media institution would value. An obvious one is a private event space because they didn't have it within their own tenancy. They did, but not big enough ones, not 50-person ones. And you can have a lot of fun with a media anchor tenant, right? I'm sure they have their own recording studios and things, but they may not have particularly niche things for video content. So food for thought there. Now, I've got two options here because what we discussed with the owner is, hey, how cool would it be if we almost had like a 1,500 square meter co-working operation and then the remaining 700 square meters is a spec suite, like 1x spec suite. And the reality, it's not 700. When you factor in circulation, how you're going to split that up, that's probably going to look more like 650 square meters, but it's fine because when they rentalize it, it's going to be at a premium. So what does that look like? What does that look like? I just want to make sure I split this floor correctly. Let's say it's kind of like this. Like, let's say the entrance is here and you've got your front of house here. You almost want the co-working experience to stay on the left-hand side. And this is like the spec suite, the 650 square meter one. That seems about right in terms of ratio. So that's one option. The other option was, hey, what does it look like if we, for the sake of this video, I'll go opposite to what we recommended because we actually wanted to go smaller. So I had an option where we had 1,200 square meters because I do think of co-working, because I do think the future of flex is super bright. However, if you can figure out ways to generate income beyond just your desks and your meeting rooms within that business, for example, by servicing the spec suite that the landlords ask for you, by reducing your operating costs because some of it's being put into outgoings because the owner's asking you to put in particular amenities within that footprint, well then you don't need as much space technically, do you, for your co-working business? Because we always strive for more as an operator because you want economies of scale, but you can actually start shrinking it because your costs are being decreased. You're making money outside of just re-renting out your desks, and which makes it a very appetizingly sized operation for you because you're super confident you can hit 100% occupancy. versus the 70, 80% that some struggle to hit. So we won't go for the 1200. Let's say it's an 1800 square meter scenario for you, right? And then the remainder is what, 400 square meters. But let's say that's 350 square meters because of the vacancy, the circulation for spec suite and co-working. So that would almost look like, if you're still front of house, I still think it would look something like this, you know, spec suite. Where this kind of area, these areas are kind of a specialized pre-fitted out spec suite for the owner to lease out with their leasing agents. Because this area here, these two areas here, for both option 1 and 2, the spec suites, they're not in your flex P&L, right? You're not responsible for filling that space and therefore going, oh, I've got this chunk of area that I need to rentalize and include in my occupancy targets, which can be very intimidating because, as many of you know, if you're watching this, enterprise suites are great when you fill them, but when they're empty, they can sit empty for 2-3 years at a time and really kill your P&L. This actually gets leased out traditionally. So it's almost like, okay, you work with your owner and their leasing agents to lease it out. But the value propositions of the spec suite increases because they're being serviced by your co-working floor. Because when you think about it, in both options, if you've got your full-time staff in there servicing the co-working, your concierge, your community manager, your center manager, or maybe you only have 2 on-site staff because of these smaller sites where you hybridize the roles, imagine if they're able to service those spec suites as well. Well, then suddenly they can be sold as a premium because they're like a hotelified spec suite. So if we look at our desk density calculations, if we come back up here, let's go up here for a second. We'll run with option 1 just to keep this simple. Okay, so if we go 1500 square meters, because it's on the smaller side, I reckon we divide it by a desk density of 6 square meters. So how many desks is that? That's 250 workstations. Okay, and then I would say you'd want at least 200 of those in private office and maybe 50 open plan. 50 tops open plan desks. I'm actually going to revise that. Let's go. Yeah, let's go 225 and 25, I think, for something that small. Because the open plan desks are less, how can we sell these? It's more packaged up with certain private offices who know they're going to get visitors to come in, so you can give them to the people who, some of the larger customers that buy a private office, or they're used for a design consideration to help the floor plan breathe. Because open plan dedicated workstations, and again, you know, it's subjective. If this is a suburban opportunity, less in the CBD, where you know there's a ton of those customers, sure, and where your rent obligation is lower, so you can get away with some of those cheaper open plan desks. Just remember, as we always talk about, the private offices are your bread and butter, and they're sold 6 to 12 months at a time. They're not sold month to month. So even when you think about your business case and your P&L, just close your eyes and pretend you're up and running. How stressful would it be if a majority of your income next month could be gone? Absolutely not, right? I mean, flexibility comes at a premium, but that's just a headache of a business. You'd want majority of those workstations to be locked in at least a year at a time. So then you can figure out your renewals, you look at your schedule, who do we need to retain, which ones do we need to refill because they're leaving. Otherwise, your occupancy target is just every quarter, every year, your team's just going to be scrambling, right? So yeah, in option 1, you've got 225 desks in private offices, 25 in open plan. I'd say with this desk density calculation, you've got 1x 12p meeting room, 1x 6 to 8p, and maybe 2 4ps, and then you've got a bunch of phone booths, right, situated around the floor. I think that's a good mix. Then if the landlord asks you again to put stuff in for those anchor tenants, like an event space or a media studio or a war room or whatever the legal people want, you might have to sacrifice some of those workstations to fit them in. So your density might look like more of a 6.5 to 7. It really depends once you get into that detailed design phase. When we look at the spec suite considerations, I think it's very attractive because I think the key thing is, one, it de-risks your co-working P&L. You can generate income, so there's a fee for you to service those, which you can negotiate with your landlord. And then three, it creates this mini incubator. So a lot of owners like to think that their whole asset can be an incubator. Like, oh, the co-working space, when they outgrow, they go into here or they go into there, and they go into the building. But with this particular asset, there was no vacancies, aside for the co-working floor. There were no other spec suites within the building. So by providing a spec suite within the co-working floor, you're creating an ecosystem within that floor where if anyone potentially grows out of the co-working space and that spec suite is not sold yet by the owner or the leasing agent, you can put them in there. Or if it is sold normally 2 to 3 years at a time, and there's a vacancy coming up in that floor, you could have a wait list of customers that want to take it because they want to stay within that co-working space because you've got a lot of cool stuff coming up. I think that's all I want to talk about for this particular idea, because the real resonating thing is everything I'm looking at now. If a landlord comes to me and says, I've got this floor, if the floor is big enough, immediately I'm like, hey, let's carve this up. I want to take 1,500 square meters of this floor. Let's take the remaining 700 square meters in this scenario to either do a large spec suite or cut it up into 2 smaller ones. Speak to your leasing agents about that, which is preferable. That's the path I'm taking, right? The last one, the sustainability idea. This is more of a shout out to a couple of entrepreneurs that, funnily enough, started and run a brewery called Young Henry's, Oscar and his team. We recently caught up and talk about these algae reactors that they actually devised and used for their brewing, for their beer, right? And I'm not going to butcher the science behind it, but they essentially recycle the carbon dioxide when they brew the yeast using algae. They figured out a way how to create a pretty much a biome reactor of algae so that it can constantly recycle carbon dioxide, which then can be leveraged anywhere. It doesn't just have to be when you're brewing beer. So there's an opportunity for you to look at, if you're a landlord, putting some of these algae reactors on your roof if it's dead space, if you can't put a rooftop bar or anything up there like that, and recycle carbon dioxide and reduce your carbon footprint that way, because it doesn't need to be a sexy space. All right, well, hopefully that's helpful. I think I'm coming down with something. I'm not too sure. Some sort of festive sickness, and let's see if it gets worse. But I'll speak to you again soon.